Hey guys, it's Liv here, and in today's video, I'm interviewing the Sydney Regional Champion, who ended up going on an undefeated run actually at Sydney Regionals. And if you guys want to see some more content where I try and interview or at least discuss the teams that ended up winning these regional events, make sure to like and subscribe and answer the comment question of the day. Are you excited for Regulation C? Personally, I'm pretty excited, and I'm going to guess my person who I'm interviewing today, who is Gilbo, aka Liam. If you want to say hi.
Hello there, I'm Gilbo from Sydney, Australia.
I guess the first way, of course, to get started for anyone who might not know you, do you want to give a little bit of a background, I guess, on your experience with competitive and just how you got started in this in the first place?
Yeah, of course. So I first started competitive VGC in 2015. I saw an ad on TV for a national tournament in Melbourne and thought I'd show up. So ever since 2015, about 8 years now, I've played pretty competitively in Australia. I don't think I really started taking off as a well-known player until about 2017 when I won Sydney Regionals for the first time. But yeah, I mean, for the past 8 years, I've cut a few regionals, come second at 2 of them, top 4 at another, and I ended up coming 5th at the International Championship in Melbourne, and recently winning Sydney Regionals just a day ago.
Well, it's honestly a pretty impressive resume. Out of curiosity, have you played any other formats, or do you stick to strictly VGC?
So for as long as I've played competitive Pokemon, I've strictly stuck to VGC. I mean, obviously there are different VGC formats, but I never got into the other types like OU or UU just because I never really had that much enjoyment out of them compared to showing up in person to in-person events, which is always great to be at.
It's pretty fair. It's definitely a very different experience. I actually personally started doing a lot more of the in-person stuff versus online, and I can safely agree. It is very different competing in person and getting to see who you're actually fighting face to face. And I think it adds a lot more, I think it just adds a lot more enjoyment getting to meet new people as well who share the same sort of passion for the game.
Yeah, it definitely does, especially when the community in Australia at least is very tight-knit, and there's always great people around that are always willing to help out, and everyone there is very supportive of starting out at VGC or whether you're already a veteran at VGC. It's very inclusive and just warming to be around.
Well, speaking of the Sydney VGC scene, it seemed like there was a lot of really strong competitors this format. Is there, I guess, anything that, before we get into the team itself, anything that you want to mention specifically regarding your run, or anything that surprised you going into this, or things that you were trying to just keep on top of before the event actually came up?
So before the event, to be honest, I mainly planned just to get top 16 because I only needed, I think, 70 points to qualify for Day 1 Worlds. And at the time of team building, I was making my younger brother's teams, who's in the senior division. And it was just like Dondozo, Tatsugiri, that type of basically simple core. And I never really spent the time on my team. I knew that if I had a chance of getting top 16, it would have to be something that I could move around because I didn't have as much practice on Showdown with the team or in general because the in-game didn't release Regulation C yet. So to be honest, I kind of follow the same core of like, water, fire, grass, which is like Amoonguss is my grass type, then my water type, Palafin, and then like a fire type of some sort. But flexibility, I think, was the main thing that I focused on for this tournament. I didn't know what to expect, but yeah, as long as I was flexible with the team, I thought I had the greatest chance of getting up on the higher levels.
So speaking of those team choices, right off the bat, looking at your 6, you built a team consisting of Gothitelle, Iron Hands, Qianpao, Amoonguss, Palafin, and Fluttermane. Of these 6, what did you actually decide to build around here? Because I think that trying to figure out the mon you started with will personally help give a lot of people insight into, I guess, where you felt your priorities lied for this format.
Prior to this event at the International, I had used a team combination with Farid and Torkoal, which was pretty good for me. It made me finish in the top 64, but starting with that as a basis, I kind of knew I wanted to go almost half Trick Room, half not so Trick Room led. Similar to one of my other younger siblings who won the 2020 Oceania International Championship. His team that he used back then was a hybrid of Trick Room and non-Trick Room. So that worked really well for him. He went undefeated in the entire tournament as well. And I thought I could adapt something similar with Trick Room and a bit of hyper offense. Which is why I built it around using Gothitelle as the main one, since I could trap people in, or Pokemon. So with Gothitelle, I really just started off with Gothitelle, Torkoal, Trick Room, Protect, or just fake out Trick Room. But eventually I found out those ruined Pokemon like Tinglu lowers special attack, which is incredibly bad for Torkoal. So I worked around a few bits here and there, tested as much as I could in the limited time I had, and I found that for this team at least, the Iron Hands I had was definitely one of the most core pieces of this entire team.
So speaking of your Iron Hands, it looks like you have a pretty interesting spread with the safety goggles and Sword Stance, Wild Charge, Drain Punch, and Protect. In terms of the Terra type, how did you decide on Terra Fire, especially when you wanted this to handle Pokemon such as Tinglu?
The reason why I chose Terra Fire was to eat up those Will-O-Wisps from Arcanine, and because it's also good against all the Flutter Mains, which I thought would be very prevalent, seeing how there was a massive surge in those ruined Pokemon. It does not do well, unfortunately, against Great Tusks, which a few of my opponents did have, and it doesn't do well against ground types in general, which is not the best thing for me.
Speaking of your ground type matchup, it does look like thankfully you have a lot of common partners to check in ground types, things like Palafin and Qianpao. In terms of your support here though, one of the most noteworthy things that I'm seeing is this Amoonguss. Did you intend for the Amoonguss to be doing anything specific, or was this just meant to be a really strong redirection option for you?
To be honest, like in full transparency, I did not use Amoonguss as well as I thought I did until maybe after Game 3 against Nicholas Can, I believe. The reason why is because it was kind of like a last minute addition to the team in case I wanted to use it or not use it. But once I started to realize its potential after my round 3 game, or Game 3 of day 1, I definitely utilized it a lot more. The Terra Water typing helped out heaps, especially against some Flare Blitzes and all the super effective moves that would have hit into my Iron Hands. Ultimately, it's probably one of the key members of the team in hindsight.
That's definitely pretty incredible to hear, especially after you had seemed to have adapted your strategy going into day 2 to fit one of the Pokemon that you felt you otherwise weren't playing as properly. It's definitely a hard thing to just think of on the spot, especially without a lot of practice.
Once again, I am notorious for my team building skills being either a hit or a complete miss, and this is the one circumstance, 1 out of 10 times, where it turns out the team I'm using actually does work in the end.
In terms of your other support piece on this team, it looks like your Gothitelle was the key Trick Room choice. Was there anything else you considered in this slot, or do you feel like this always had to be Gothitelle?
So I did consider Farigiraf just because that whole idea of Choice Band Terra Normal Dragonite was very prevalent. I even team built with Choice Band Dragonite, and I saw the usage statistics for it being very high, and I thought, okay, I need a extreme speed counter, which was the Farigiraf. The only issue with Farigiraf is that it lacks a bit of offense, it lacks a bit of pressure, and it's kind of just utilized only for that extreme speed or jet punch, blocking. So I thought I'd go with something a bit more, pressure related, really put all my opponents on their toes. But unlike typical Gothitelle teams, it does not carry Perish Song or, teams along those lines. So it's a very weird Gothitelle set in my opinion.
At the very least, it seems like your Gothitelle is a really good enabler for the SD Iron Hands, if nothing else, especially with the Helping Hand, which looks like it should be a really good way to help boost your damage, even outside of Trick Room for that matter, on this Pokemon.
Yeah, look, it was actually, believe it or not, one of the key parts of my team was to have the Gothitelle and the Iron Hands, and to use Fake Out Sword Stance. But believe it or not, I rarely ever got to that stage where I could, fake out in Sword Stance on its own. Most of the time, I was leading Gothitelle Flutter Mane, fake out Shadow Ball, or Gothitelle Palafin, fake out Wave Crash. So along those lines were the ones that I was pretty much geared towards.
Speaking of Palafin, how valuable do you think that Palafin was to your run? I noticed that there was a couple others that ended up doing pretty well. And do you think that Palafin was the best choice here, or do you wish that it might have been something else?
In terms of water types, I think it was definitely one of the best choices. I did consider Iron Bundles, which would have, as a substitute, worked really well, seeing how it gets access to Encore. Its Freeze Dry does phenomenal amounts of damage, and it's got Hydro Pump on it as well. But the thing with Palafin is that, it having Haze was, one, my Dondozo counter, and two, the amount of just sheer raw power it exerts is just insanely high damaging that I couldn't, not have it on the team. And this is going to sound really, really, really strange, but for most of my games, I did not use Palafin in its hero mode. I only used it in its zero mode.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I kid you not. It is very in tune with my playstyle, which is like a mixture of just hyper offense or slow defense.
So moving on to your Ruin Pokemon of choice, Chien-Pao. I know that a lot of people are running Terra Ghost currently, but I see that you actually decided to go with the Terra Dark. Was this for any particular reason?
Yes, so my Chien-Pao, once again, like my Among Us, was a very last minute choice. So I've seen everyone running the standard set of Ice Spinner, Sucker Punch, Sacred Sword, Protect with Terra Ghost, just based off my preliminary research into it. But I decided to go for the Terra Dark and use Throat Chop instead, because I had a really strong gut feeling that people were going to be running bulky Flutter Manes to eat up Sucker Punches. And I'm pretty sure if you notice in one of my games, I did Terra Dark in the end, and I went for Throat Chop just because I was uncertain whether Throat Chop would just even get the KO in the first place.
Yeah, it seems like it was a really strong addition, at least to making Chien-Pao do some more damage, especially with your Focus Sash being the item of choice, as I know that at the very least from experience as well as from seeing it in play, that without the Life Orb, it definitely does a lot less damage. But the Terra Dark seems to hopefully help a lot with your offensive presence here.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing as well, again, with my choice of Chien-Pao was it kind of lacks that synergy with the team, but ultimately I think it made a decent accompaniment with the Iron Hands.
So moving on to the final mon on your team, we do have Flutter Mane. Now I noticed that among all of the top 8 teams, every single team out of Flutter Mane. Do you think that this will end up continuing through Regulation C? And if not, do you think there maybe was another ghost type that you could have thrown in this space instead?
So I think, just like everyone else using Flutter Mane, it's probably because of its fairy matchup that makes it so strong and formidable against so many other Pokemon out there. The Ruin Pokemon being just so prevalent as dark types is one reason to use it with Moonblast or Dazzling Gleam, but the other reason is like Roaring Moon, Iron Hands, Great Tusks. All of those are fighting types or dark types, and they are very weak to Flutter Mane. And just as such a fast and heavy hitting Pokemon, it is just too phenomenal to not use. However, in saying that, I do expect people to start using like Terra Steel Tinglu, or maybe Dragapult even more, just because it counters it a lot better. But at the same time, there are plenty of other ghost types that are good. As I mentioned, Dragapult's good. Ceruledge is quite good. Its Shadow Sneak just does heaps of damage to Flutter Mane. But other than that, fairy types as well out there, there's not too many, unfortunately, that can keep up to the same standard as Flutter Mane. And I think one of my opponents had an Azumarill, which was really scary to play against. And that was a very strong fairy type.
It's definitely interesting to see you bring up Azumarill, actually, because I noticed that one Azumarill ended up actually making day 2, which is pretty incredible. What would you say, though, among the day 2 pool was the most surprising Pokemon to make it, in your opinion?
Most surprising, in my opinion, was probably the Roaring Moon. just because I did not expect it to be there, seeing how it's half dark and half dragon.
I will say it's definitely interesting to see you mentioning Roaring Moon, but I think honestly, in hindsight, I agree. Because looking at a lot of the top teams, pretty much all of them have multiple counterplay options to it. For one, the Flutter Mains existing on every single team, but also the fact that we see 3 different Xian Pows in top cut, on top of also a Great Tusk, which is very easy to invest for Roaring Moon. We also see stuff like Dragonite, Arcanine, Iron Hands. Pretty much every team has at least 2 options for it, besides, I guess, Megan's team looks like it only has 1 option, as well as Ryan Hercus' team, which, if I had to guess, it does look like they built the same team together, but if not, they came to a pretty similar conclusion for it. But other than those 2 teams, though, it looks like every team has 2 or even 3 options for Roaring Moon, so I can get where you're coming from in terms of that being a pretty surprising pick here.
Yeah, definitely. I noticed with, I think, Ryan's team and Megan's team, I might be mistaken here because one of my opponents had a very similar team in the Swiss rounds on day 1. I believe it was Emma Williams. I think she had a Gyarados team as well, or something along those lines. I just noticed that team compositions like that are, very good for this type of meta game that's just starting out. And I think, in terms of Roaring Moon, their teams definitely deal a lot better against it, whereas, out there right now for all the Flutter Mains, it's just a lot of just potential damage that the Roaring Moon can just take, which is not the best. But, judging by how Sam Pandalis went with it, going really strong this entire tournament, and finishing, second yesterday, it just goes to show that not only is the Pokemon great, but the player was just as phenomenal.
So, going into the run itself, I noticed that you ended up actually going undefeated, which, for especially such a long streak of games, is pretty incredible. How do you think that you managed to do that?
Well, I think it was mainly throwing people off with the Gothitelle and Iron Hands as being just like one major contributor. But the other thing is, my team in general, I think, does fairly well against most of the stock standard teams. And the key fundamental difference, I think, was my team had kind of a bit of a structure to it, which was set up Trick Room, get a Swords Dance up, and then get Iron Hands to sweep after that, and then to have my Among Us use Pollen Puff on it. The other thing as well is my team was very focused on kind of positioning and getting in the right spot. And in circumstances against some of the higher level players, I really did have to make those incredibly difficult calls. Like against Alistair Sandover in my top 8 match, I think game 1, turn 1, I had to risk a turn 1 fake out into his Flutter Main slot, predicting the terrestrialization into Steel. And it sounds incredibly risky, but when you're in a top cut against some of the greatest players in the entire Australian community, let alone representatives of Oceania, you have to really put yourself all out there. And if I do remember correctly, 5 out of 8, or maybe 4 out of 8 players in the top cut were a part of the Australian team for the World Cup tournament held by Victory Road VGC. So they're definitely not players to sleep on, in my opinion.
Oh wow, that's honestly incredible to hear that you were able to beat such a strong pool of players too. I had no idea that many were a part of the World Cup team for Australia.
Yeah, it was very scary, to be honest, seeing that top cut. It was very stacked as well. And Sam Pandalis being a Worlds finalist, Megan getting top 8 at Worlds twice in a row now, and Nicholas Can being a world champion and also second at Worlds. It just goes to show that the top cut was just incredibly dangerous and stacked. I think out of all the players there, everyone there would have at least cut a type of regional of some sort.
Moving on to, I guess, since we have talked about already the Pokemon you thought was the most surprising to be there, in terms of Pokemon that either ended up performing better than you expected or even stuff that might not have made top cut, what Pokemon do you think going forward that people are going to have to start preparing a lot more for?
I think people will have to prepare for a lot more Flutter Mains and probably booster energy sets as well, because my prediction is that there will be a lot of speed boosting Fluttermanes to outspeed potential Dragapults now. I think people should also prepare for the eventuality of Fissure on Tinglu, and just in general, Palafin, since it's going to rise in usage by quite a bit, I think.
So now that you've finished the first Regulation C tournament, among the 4 Ruin Pokemon, which of these do you think will be the most terrifying to play against going forward?
I definitely think Chen Pao will be the most terrifying, just because of the defense drops that it will give all the Pokemon around. And if you have a Choice Scarf physically offensive Pokemon or a priority Pokemon, then that's going to make it incredibly dangerous to play against. But also at the same time, Chen Pao is very fast, has quite high attack, and it can also use Throat Chop, Ice Spinner, or any other physically damaging move to hit Pokemon like Fluttermane quite easily. There's also the risk of Chen Pao having Speed Ties, which in my top 4 match against Galvin, game 2 literally came down to 3 Speed Ties in a row.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was quite crucial, I think, in deciding whether we went to a game 3 or not. And fortunately, I got the damage or the Speed Tie win. Yeah, other than that, I don't think Tinglu... Oh, I think Tinglu will be a threat, but Wo Chen might start to drop off a bit, just because I don't think it's going to give as much offensive pressure, aside from it being able to use Leech Seed, Ruination, and Pollen Puff.
So I see that you've mentioned every other of the Ruin Pokemon, but what are your thoughts on Chi-Yu in this format? Do you think it has any weight, or do you think that it's just not noteworthy enough to mention?
I definitely think Chi-Yu has the potential to do a lot in this metagame. The only issue I'm finding with it is pairing it up with the correct partner Pokemon.
It's perfectly understandable. It looks like the only 2 Chi-Yus looking at that top 8 bracket happen to be in the same team, so I could definitely get where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, I did verse a few Chi-Yus previously in the day, which were Terra Water, I believe, but if it doesn't terrestrialize, then it does become quite susceptible to like fighting moves or water moves.
Before we end off, do you have any advice to anyone else who might be trying to get into Regulation C for things to look out for? Especially for myself, this is going to be something I will need to take notes on, because I've been struggling a lot with building for Regulation C. So I would love just any advice you have, and I'm sure the people at home as well would appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. The main thing that I would advise towards is to try and build your teams based on like some type of idea you have in your mind, whether it's Fake Out Trick Room, Fake Out Dragon Dance, or even just like Trick Room Rage Powder. Start with something that you can build around first, give it a test out on maybe Showdown or some Regulation C format, and then go from there and see what you can adapt. In all honesty, just because Ruin Pokemon are allowed, you don't really need to put it on your team. Like for example, over in the US right now, I think it's Joe, UX9, came second, and he doesn't have a Ruined Pokemon on his team, I'm pretty sure. So it's definitely something you don't need to have, but it can work in your favor, depending on how you want to use it, seeing how the stat changes affects everyone on the field, including yourself and your opponent's Pokemon.
Is there anything else that you feel like you want to mention? It can be literally anything at all that we might not have covered today.
Well, I feel like in regards to just this entire team building and just idea behind what I've kind of come up with for Sydney, is that my team is probably fairly straightforward, almost cookie cutter, with the whole Among Us, Iron Hands, Gothitelle. But unlike the other top cut teams, I didn't have an Intimidate Pokemon like Arcanine, which I think is important to keep in mind, because sometimes you want a team build with a bit of flexibility, and having Arcanine not on my team definitely made things less flexible. But ultimately, it just comes down to how well you position yourself and play the games that you're in. I think that's the key part of this to get out of this whole entire experience.
Yeah, now that you mention it, actually, you're one of 2 teams that didn't have an Intimidator. The only other team actually being, from what looks to be an adaptation of the Nails build from the Series 2 Sun team with Lilycole and then Great Tusk, Dragonite, Fluttermane, and in this case, Chien-Pao over King Gambit.
Yeah, I really was considering having Intimidate on the team, but I did cave into that last Ruined Pokemon being Chien-Pao. And in all honesty, it was quite the good trade-off, even if I wasn't utilizing Sword of Ruin correctly. Just the fact that it was so fast saved me in games against Alistair in top 8, in game 3, saved me against Galvin, and in numerous other games I just used it to deal tremendous amounts of damage.
I guess to follow up with your point about Intimidate, if there was one thing that you had to change about the team, whether it's a Pokemon, maybe it's a set that you ran, or anything else regarding the team, if you had to change one thing, what do you think it would be?
I would definitely reinvestigate looking at Chen Pao, just because I had such a severe Great Tusk weakness. I'd also maybe look at Palafin. Maybe I can utilize Gothitelle with it a bit better. It's kind of a really tricky team that I was building because I wasn't sure how to utilize certain parts of it. Like Trick Room, I think, wasn't being utilized as heavily. I think I had a bit of a weakness to Clear Smogomungus, and other people's Palafins, which I think can definitely be improved upon. But I don't think I had spent enough time preparing for the entire metagame at the time.
I guess it is definitely pretty interesting to see, considering you had mentioned at the beginning of this actually that one of the things you were looking to build around was Trick Room with Iron Hands. So it's weird to see that of everything that you could have mentioned, that the one thing you felt like you weren't utilizing properly was the Trick Room in the end.
Yeah, it was quite strange that I wasn't actually utilizing it to its fullest potential. But in my other matches, I did quite use it heavily. Especially since most people's counter to Trick Room were Amoonguses or Torkles.
I will say though, despite the fact that it seems like you haven't had a lot of practice with this team, or at least not as much as you would have liked, it still is really impressive that you not only managed to win an entire regional without dropping a game, but also that you ended up already qualifying this early with your Worlds invite. Massive congratulations there.
Yeah, I am very, very happy to have qualified for Day 1 Worlds. I'm especially glad to be a part of Australia going into Yokohama this year, and I do hope to make it there. Make it there in August, I believe. So it'll be very exciting to see a lot of the VGC players around, and to hopefully put my best foot forward for Australia.
Speaking of, is there anything that you would like to just give a shout out to, or just shine some light on while before we get to wrapping up the video?
I'd like to shout out James Black, of course. He's a inspirational person and has helped me just in general with so many things. I want to shout out my younger brother Jack, who's now retired. He's just great with bouncing ideas off and always seeing my terrible team ideas. And to my two younger brothers, Andrew and James, who are in the senior division, just want to shout out them, and hopefully they do well going into Worlds this year as well, because I think they're going to be going as well.
Well, it seems like at the very least, if nothing else, qualifying for Worlds runs in the family, so hopefully you'll be able to enjoy your journey with them as well.
Yeah, I definitely do hope so as well.
With that said, I'd like to thank you all for watching, as well as to Liam for joining us today. Thank you very much for the time, as well as just your thoughts on the format. It was great talking with you.
Definitely, it was 100% a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad I was able to join you on this interview. It's been amazing.
Well, for anyone at home, if you guys enjoyed this and you want to see some more content like this, of course, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe for more. I'd like to get some more interviews, of course, with other people in the future. I actually have one lined up for later in the week with James Black, who ended up getting top 10 at the Sydney Regionals as well. And of course, I would like to give a massive shout out to our channel members, being Josh K. Ultraplayer, Mia, Zeke Zero, Matt O'Shea, Bbat, Anna Zipper, Timo Mueller, and Fonzie. Thank you guys so much for the extra support you give on the videos, and it goes a long way towards helping out the channel. And with that said, I'd like to see you guys as well in the video tomorrow, where we're going to try and get up some more Regulation C games. Peace out, everyone.